A police canine froze in the middle of Terminal 4, then began barking uncontrollably at a sleek brown suitcase. Travelers paused, security tensed. No scanner had flagged the bag, yet the dog wouldn't back down. When officers finally opened it, what they uncovered changed everything. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Tomorrow, same time, we'll bring you another true story of loyalty, instinct, and the silent bond between handler and canine. Now, let's rewind to where it all began. Under the flicker of cold airport lights, the fluorescent lights of Logan International Airport buzzed quietly above as Officer Emma Blake zipped up her patrol jacket and tugged her black cap snugly into place. Outside, snow still clung to the edges of the glass doors, remnants of the early morning flurry that had coated Boston in a soft hush. It was 5:32 a.m., the hour when the terminal transitioned from silence to slow-blowing chaos. Passengers, still wrapped in scarves and sleep, trickled in one by one, wheeling glossy suitcases behind them like sleepy shadows. At her side, Rico moved with quiet precision. The German shepherd, nearing 6 years old, walked with a grace that belied the scars under his thick black and tan coat. His eyes scanned every passerby with the calm calculation of a seasoned veteran, ears twitching at every flicker of noise. Emma didn't have to give him orders. After nearly 4 years together, they moved like one unit. The leash in her left hand was mostly ceremonial. She glanced toward Checkpoint C, where a new wave of international arrivals had begun to filter in. It was the typical morning rhythm. A few flagged bags, the occasional overanxious flyer, some tired business people swiping through their emails at Starbucks. Nothing out of the ordinary, until Rico froze. It was subtle at first. His pace slowed, his shoulders stiffened. Emma felt the tension in the leash before she saw his body pivot toward one of the luggage carts near the business class check-in. The cart, recently offloaded from a black Lincoln SUV, held 3 high-end travel trunks. One in particular, a dark brown crocodile-painted leather piece, caught Rico's undivided attention. Emma narrowed her eyes. Rico didn't bark yet. He lowered his head slightly, nostrils flaring, muscles tight. Emma followed his gaze and clocked the owner. Male, early 40s SX, dressed in an unwrinkled charcoal coat over a tailored navy suit. He was speaking quietly into a Bluetooth earpiece, not even noticing the dog. There was a clipped efficiency in his posture, like someone used to controlling rooms. Emma gently tugged Rico's lead. "Easy," she whispered, but Rico didn't budge. He took another step toward the trunk, then emitted a low, guttural growl. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the dull hum of the terminal like a scalpel. Emma's pulse kicked up. She approached the man slowly. "Sir," she said, keeping her tone professional but firm. "I'm Officer Blake with the airport canine unit. Could I speak with you a moment?" The man turned, pausing his call. Up close, his features were smooth, unreadable. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked. His voice was calm, polished, American accent layered with something faintly Pacific, Singapore or Hong Kong maybe. Emma gestured to the trunk. "My partner's indicating interest in your luggage. We'd like to conduct secondary screening." A flicker, just a flicker, crossed his eyes. "That bag contains only personal items. I'm traveling under a diplomatic passport," he added, pulling it out from an inside pocket and offering it. "Vincent Cho, U.S. Department of Cultural Affairs." Emma took the passport, scanning the page with professional detachment. Everything looked valid. The diplomatic seal shimmered under the lights. Still, Rico's stance hadn't changed. Joe raised an eyebrow. "Is the dog trained for narcotics?" "He's a multi-purpose canine," Emma replied. "Explosives, biologicals, customs violations. We've logged over 100 interdictions together." "Impressive," Joe said. "But I assure you, officer, there's nothing in that bag that should concern a dog or your department." Emma didn't respond. Her radio crackled softly as she keyed her mic. "Control, this is Blake. We've got a possible interest flag at business check-in. Requesting backup and EOD standby. Subject presenting diplomatic credentials, but dog indicates alert behavior." Joe's expression didn't shift, but she noticed his fingers tighten slightly around the handle of his carry-on. Meanwhile, Rico began to growl again, louder this time, stepping protectively between Emma and the luggage cart. Several travelers nearby had stopped to watch. A TSA officer approached cautiously. "What's going on?" he murmured. "Standard check," Emma replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. Then, as Joe took a slow step to the side, perhaps to leave, Rico snapped into full alert. His bark boomed through the terminal, sharp and sudden, triggering startled gasps from onlookers. Emma reacted instantly. "Sir, I need you to remain exactly where you are," she said, hand moving subtly toward her belt. Ja didn't move, but something passed between them, a brief, unreadable acknowledgement. He nodded once and raised his hands just slightly. "Of course," he said. Within seconds, 2 more officers arrived and the area was cordoned off. Emma crouched beside Rico, her gloved hand brushing his shoulders. He was tense, laser-focused. This wasn't a false positive. Rico had never had one. A technician from the EOD team arrived with a handheld scanner and approached the trunk. Emma backed off with Rico. Joe stood quietly, watching them work, but his eyes, Emma noticed, kept flicking toward the exits, calculating, and in that moment she knew something was wrong. It wasn't just about the trunk. It was something larger, and Rico, without a single command, had seen it first. The technician ran the handheld scanner over the leather trunk in slow, deliberate arcs, while Emma stood just behind him, hand resting gently on Rico's back. The dog's body remained taut, every muscle coiled like a spring, eyes locked on the trunk. The scanner's tiny screen blinked green, its tone flat and dismissive, no trace of explosives, no trace of explosive signature, nothing to suggest danger. Emma frowned. A second technician arrived with a portable IMS sniffer, the kind used for trace narcotics and chemical vapors. Again it read clean. "False alert, maybe," the junior tech offered, not unkindly. Emma didn't answer. Her eyes were on Rico. He hadn't moved. His growl had tapered into a low hum, his breathing shallow but focused. Emma had seen this posture before, not when detecting drugs or even standard explosives. No, this was something rarer, more primal. She stepped aside and knelt to Rico's level, speaking low, just above a whisper. "Talk to me, buddy. What are you getting?" Rico's ear twitched at the sound of her voice, but his gaze didn't waver from the trunk. Then, abruptly, he sat down, one paw raised halfway, tail flat against the floor. A behavior code she recognized instantly. This wasn't detection, this was warning. And only once before had she seen Rico signal like this. Her heart gave a dull, anxious thud. Detroit, it hit her with the clarity of a gunshot. 2 years ago, assisting a joint customs operation at Detroit Metro, Emma and Rico had been deployed to screen a diplomatic courier shipment flagged by an anonymous tip. The dog had reacted strongly. Same tension, same elevated alert. But the boxes, though suspiciously labeled, had been scanned, opened, and cleared by federal biohazard teams. No contraband, no reportable pathogens. Within 72 hours, the case was closed. What stuck with Emma, though, was that Rico refused to enter the inspection bay for 3 days after. He'd shown signs of psychological distress. Not fear. Rico wasn't the type. But discomfort. Residual anxiety. And for weeks afterward, Emma had noticed subtle shifts in his behavior during routine inspections. He had, in her words to the unit's behavioral specialist, started avoiding ghosts. And now here they were again, the same alert, same behavior, same vacuum of data. "Can you rerun it on long-way infrared? Just humor me." The man blinked. "Mab, we ran every spectrum scan standard. There's nothing in there but clothes, maybe books." "Then run it again," she said, sharper this time. He complied, resetting the scanner. Rico gave a short, clipped bark, a command bark, not aggressive but urgent. People in the cordoned area turned to look. Vincent Joe remained still, hands in view, but Emma saw it. A flicker of tension behind the eyes. He was watching Rico now, not her. Calculating. "Control Blake," Emma said into her radio, voice low. "Still no chemical or explosive detection. But K9 maintains elevated alert. Requests secondary hazmat consultation and flag subject credentials for deeper validation." The response came with static. "Acknowledged, hazmat en route. Diplomatic clearance being reviewed." Joe spoke softly now. "Officer Blake, if I may, I have no objection to cooperating, but I do need to make my flight. My business in Vancouver is timed." Emma straightened. "You'll be able to rebook, sir, if everything checks out. For now, I'm asking for your patience." She didn't add that patience wasn't what concerned her. Rico had never once signaled a false positive. Not once in 147 field deployments. She turned to the TSA officer beside her. "Can you verify the manifest on that trunk? If it's just books and clothing, I want specifics." He nodded and stepped toward the inspection terminal. Meanwhile, Rico shifted slightly, his head tilting, sniffing again. Emma recognized that tilt. It wasn't just scent. He was processing layers, changes, maybe even decay. The biological sniffer embedded in his training wasn't limited to just explosives. He could detect mold spores, protein breakdown, certain biohazard precursors. Still crouching beside him, Emma murmured, "This isn't chemicals, is it?" But her gut tightened. What if Rico was picking up something that wasn't in the databases? Not illicit, not banned, just unrecognized. A substance that didn't register on standard scanners. Something in transition, something in development. She recalled what the report in Detroit had labeled the flagged cargo, non-apparicizing about substate origin undetermined. That phrasing had haunted her, especially when weeks later, 2 handlers at that facility reported recurring migraines, and it was swept under the rug. Too little data, too few symptoms, and no concrete evidence. But dogs remember differently. Dogs don't need paperwork. Rico began pacing again, circling the trunk, his nose nearly touching the base. Emma stayed silent, let him work. His body stayed stiff, posture tight, not hunting, tracking, not searching, containing. She reached for her phone, pulling up the internal database of field alerts. Her own reports from Detroit had been redacted. That she already knew. But something else showed up now. A note tagged to Rico's profile. Date, 4 days after Detroit. Subject K985 exhibited elevated anxiety after contact with subset Group 3 sample. No current federal classification. Handler recommended rest. She had never written that. Her signature was forged. Her mouth went dry. Emma, someone called behind her. It was Officer Talbot arriving with hazmat liaison. "Do we have?" She straightened. "Dogs on something. It's not narcotics, not explosives. Could be bioorganic, could be heat reactive. I need a containment box. We'll need a cause to escalate," Talbot replied cautiously. "Scanner's clean. The dog's not." "Is he doing?" "Waiting," Emma said. "For something to happen." She turned her eyes back to Vincent Joe. He stood with folded arms now, observing the entire exchange with clinical neutrality. But his foot tapped once, then again, and as Emma watched, he shifted his weight subtly toward the nearest exit corridor. Emma didn't wait for further permission. As the hazmat team prepared a containment crate and TSA officials continued crowd control near the business check-in, she slipped behind the security zone and pulled out her department-issued tablet. The airport Wi-Fi lagged slightly as she accessed the Department of Homeland Enforcement's intranet, fingers moving with purpose. She didn't trust any of this, and she especially didn't trust how perfectly clean Vincent Joe's luggage scanned despite Rico's very specific, very rare behavior. Emma navigated directly to the Field Deployment Archive, selecting K985, Rico's code, and scrolling to the Detroit entry. She had submitted that report herself. She remembered the night she wrote it, 2 in the morning, sitting alone in the inspection hangar, Rico lying at her feet, his ears twitching at shadows that weren't there. But when she reached the date, January 14, 2 years prior, the page returned a single line. Entry unavailable. Record archived by Administrative Authority Level 4. Please contact Risk Compliance if access is required. Emma blinked. That wasn't right. Field reports didn't get locked unless there was a security breach or an active investigation. And if there had been one, she would have been notified, or at the very least debriefed. She tapped the alternate notes tab, hoping for backups or handler remarks. Only 3 entries appeared, all system generated. The first was a line from a behavioral analyst she didn't recognize. K985 observed displaying elevated stress indicators post-deployment. Cause undetermined. No environmental anomalies detected. The second, follow-up declined by command pending further incidents. And the third, handler recommendation, rest and evaluation, potential early retirement. Except she had never written it, never even typed those words. She scrolled to the metadata and verified the timestamp, exactly 4 days after the Detroit case. That was the week she and Rico had been sent to administrative hold. supposedly because of a scheduling error. She had spent that week arguing with command, demanding full access to the case, asking why no additional testing was conducted on the shipment that had triggered Rico so violently. They had deflected, suggested it was fatigue, stress, an aberrant environmental odor. When she pushed harder, they told her the case had been cleared by CDC protocol. Then they moved Rico off the rotation for 2 weeks, and now she was looking at a fabricated note, digitally signed in her name, authorizing his retirement review. Emma stood in the dim glow of the hallway screen, her breath fogging slightly from the cold draft leaking in from the maintenance corridor. Rico had never been the same after Detroit. Not entirely. For weeks after the incident, he had shown hesitation during patrols, sometimes freezing mid-sweep or emitting faint, confused whines when passing certain types of packaging. The unit's supervising vet had classified it as mild neurofatigue from scent overstimulation, a rare but known phenomenon in high-performing K9s. They recommended decommissioning, light duties, maybe reassignment to therapy work. Emma had refused. She filed a formal objection to the evaluation board's findings, arguing that the symptoms weren't consistent with overstimulation. They were specific, consistent, patterned, and they followed a particular class of exposure she believed Rico could detect, but which the department lacked the tools to validate. Her objection went nowhere, but she kept him in service anyway. She doubled his conditioning sessions, logged his responses meticulously, and submitted weekly status updates to the National Canine Health Network. It was only after 3 months of spotless behavior and 0 false positives that Rico was cleared for unrestricted duty. And now, he had returned to the exact same behavior. Emma looked over at him. He was seated near the inspection table, still watching the trunk with quiet vigilance. His tail hadn't moved, his ears were flat but alert, and his breathing was so shallow it barely stirred his flanks. Emma returned to the tablet and switched systems. This time, she logged into the Central Canine Operations Registry, a backup database used by military and law enforcement to track deployments and anomalies nationwide. She pulled Rico's ID and selected anomaly correlations. What she found made her blood run cold. A red-agged entry from an Air National Guard base in Nevada, dated 1 month before Detroit. K946, another German Shepherd, had exhibited similar signs: refusal to approach storage lockers, prolonged alert behavior, loss of appetite, and disorientation. Diagnosis: operational fatigue. Outcome: retired. No traceable cargo linked to the behavior, no follow-up investigation. 2 more cases in smaller airports, Kansas City and Albuquerque, showed similar signs. Each dog involved was later removed from service. All reports contained one recurring phrase: no substance correlation. Emma bit her lip. Either a pattern was being ignored or deliberately buried. She flipped back to the Detroit metadata. The individual who authorized the record lock was listed as L4/CN Osher. She recognized the prefix, Compliance North, Division Osher. That meant federal, way above her clearance. She looked up again, scanning the room. Vincent Joe was now seated on one of the benches, legs crossed, typing slowly on his phone. His demeanor was calm, even pleasant, as if nothing at all concerned him. But his luggage had sparked something in a dog trained to ignore background noise and false trails. Emma put the tablet away and pulled out her notebook, the paper kind. She wrote one word in large block letters: not when evidence kept vanishing behind level 4 credentials. She moved toward the inspection table where Rico was stationed and knelt beside him. "You still with me?" she asked softly. He flicked his eyes toward her briefly, then back to the trunk. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "They tried to pull you once, but we're not letting them do it again." Officer Talbot approached from the side. "Containment teams ready. We're prepping the luggage for a controlled transfer to Hazmat Bay 3. Emma nodded. "Good. Don't open it. I want a double seal and a visual inspection protocol before it even crosses the threshold." Talbot raised an eyebrow. "You think it's live?" "I don't know what I think," she said, "but I'm done ignoring what I can't explain." She stood, glanced at Vincent again. He met her gaze across the room, expression unreadable, calm, still tapping his phone. Then he smiled slightly. Not wide, just enough. Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket. A new message. No ID, just one line. "You should have let the dog retire." Emma stared at the message on her phone for a long second, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. "You should have let the dog retire." No sender, no traceable number. Just a sentence carved in digital stone thrown at her like a warning or a threat. She locked her screen, slid the phone back into her pocket, and scanned the room. Vincent Joe was still seated calmly, his legs crossed, gaze on the departure board overhead. The man was either the most relaxed person under suspicion she'd ever seen, or he knew something no one else did and simply didn't care if they found out. Her instincts whispered the latter, but instincts weren't enough. She needed data, real data, and as luck would have it, it arrived in the form of a breathless TSA officer approaching from the far corridor, holding up a phone in one hand and waving with the other. "Officer Blake," he called, "you're going to want to see this." Emma walked toward him, Rico flanking her automatically, staying close. The officer handed her the phone. "Passenger from Gate 15 saw the commotion and came over to show us this. Said they were filming the terminal art display and caught something weird. The video was shaky at first. Typical phone footage, vertical, time-stamped 15 minutes before the first alert. A blurry mural came into view, followed by a slow pan across the luggage area. Then, just off to the left of frame, Emma saw it. A man, tall, lean, wearing a black jacket and a navy cap, approached the conveyor line with 2 rolling suitcases. One of them was unmistakably the crocodile leather trunk that Rico had flagged. But the man wasn't Vincent Zelzed. The facial structure, posture, even his gait were wrong. He paused at the edge of the carousel, leaned slightly over the trunk, reached into his coat pocket and appeared to adjust something near the base of the handle before stepping back and walking out of frame. The clip ended a second later. Emma replayed it 3 times. The movement was fast, casual, practiced. It didn't look like tampering to an untrained eye, but to her it screamed premeditated contact. She zoomed in. The stranger's face was partially visible when he turned, just enough to catch a partial profile. Emma froze the frame and held her breath. The man had a surgical mask on, standard for flu season, unremarkable on its own, but his eyes weren't unfamiliar. She'd seen them once before, in a security briefing nearly 2 years ago. An unnamed individual suspected of infiltrating a biolab shipment route through Dallas-Fort Worth, but never caught. That case had gone cold. She handed the phone back to the TSA officer. "Get me the original file. Don't just airdrop it. Physically secure it, time-stamped metadata intact, and track that passenger down, verify their identity, and think on it," he said. Hurrying away, Emma walked back toward the command station, her mind racing. She keyed into the internal airport surveillance system using her tablet, this time bypassing the canine records and accessing the baggage handling logs. Her credentials granted her partial clearance for operational footage. She searched for the video feed from Carousel Bay 6, where checked baggage entered the sorting queue. According to logs, Vincent Joe's bag had been tagged at 4:58 a.m. It should have been visible on cameras by 5 o'clock, but as she scrubbed through the feed, the screen jumped. A static blink. A cut. The log continued, but the footage did not. 8 full minutes of recorded time had passed, but the actual video skipped from 4:57 to 5:06. Emma narrowed her eyes. A blackout. That never happened unless there was a server fault or someone had manually overridden the local feed. She cross-referenced the terminal's power log. No outages, no maintenance orders, no weather impact. This was a blind spot, deliberately created. Someone had disabled the camera system during the exact time the trunk entered the baggage network. She flipped to the access log and searched for admin overrides. Only 2 users were listed during that period. One was the shift supervisor, a veteran with 12 years in operations and no history of misconduct. The other was a floating technician brought in under contract for a temporary system calibration. Name Caleb V. Monroe, Company ID, TierTech Solutions. Clearance, Limited Admin. Emma copied the name and started a separate query on the contractor. While the database loaded, she replayed the phone video again. The trunk, the adjustment, the man walking away. If Vincent hadn't touched that bag before check-in, then he wasn't in control of its contents. Which raised an immediate and critical question. Was he being used, or was he complicit in the orchestration? Either answer pointed to something coordinated, something deeper than smuggling. Emma checked the time. It was now 6:08 a.m., The flight to Vancouver had already been delayed at her request. Zhou remained silent, offering no complaint, seemingly unbothered. She glanced over her shoulder. Rico had shifted again, this time repositioning to face the crowd forming near Gate 17. His head tilted, ears perked, alert. She followed his line of sight and saw nothing out of the ordinary, just a swirl of travelers checking their phones, sipping coffee, glancing at monitors. But she trusted that posture. She had learned to trust it in Iraq, in Detroit, in Betrayan. Her tablet dinged. The Tier Tech profile loaded. Caleb Monroe had been contracted to work a single overnight shift 5 days earlier, during which he had access to the surveillance server stack. After that shift, no logs showed his keycard being used again. Emma flagged the ID and filed an urgent request with Airport IT to pull any manual firmware access records for that night. She doubted they'd find anything. Whoever set this up had cleaned their trail, but it was worth trying. She moved back toward Vincent, watching him for a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Zhou," she said, calm and measured, "did you personally pack your luggage this morning?" He looked up at her, expression unreadable. "I did." "At what time?" "Roughly 4:30. Were you alone?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because someone else handled your bag before it reached the carousel." She waited, no reaction. "We have video." Still nothing. Then he smiled faintly. "You're quite thorough, Officer Blake, and you're unusually calm for someone under investigation." "That's because I've done nothing wrong. You're aware the camera system was down for 8 minutes during the check-in." "I'm not a technician," he said. "That would be your department's problem, wouldn't it?" Emma didn't respond. She turned and walked away, leaving Rico posted in front of the bench. She returned to the mobile terminal, updated the incident log, and requested remote access to CBP's flagged package alerts from the last 48 hours. Something told her this trunk wasn't the only one. If someone had orchestrated an 8-minute blackout in a major international terminal, it wasn't for a one-off experiment. It was part of something broader, something rehearsed. She tapped her pen twice against the console. Then her screen flashed, an incoming call from Risk Compliance Level 4 internal routing. Emma hesitated, then accepted. A voice came through, flat, unhurried. "Officer Blake, you've accessed restricted surveillance logs and opened a trace on a contractor flagged by Federal Intelligence. You are now being reassigned from field observation to internal inquiry hold. Effective immediately. Please surrender your badge and weapon to Terminal Command." Emma's jaw tightened. Her response was simple. No. Emma didn't move. Her breath sat tight in her chest as the voice over the line repeated the directive in the same placid monotone. "You are to surrender your badge and weapon immediately, Officer Blake." She ended the call without responding, yanked the headset out of her tablet port and slid the device back into its holster. Her eyes swept the terminal. No one was approaching her yet, but she didn't expect the order had been made without a secondary team already in motion. Somewhere in this airport, someone had been watching her access logs, and now they wanted her neutralized. Quietly. Emma wasn't in the mood to play quiet. She stepped back toward the security checkpoint where the hazmat team had finished securing the trunk and was now prepping it for secondary transport. A thick-walled biocontainment crate had been positioned beside the conveyor lock, sealed with positive pressure seals and a nitrogen purge valve. She flagged down the senior technician, a lanky man with salt and pepper stubble and wary eyes. "You find anything?" He gave her a tight nod. "More than we wanted to. The case has false internal walls. Lining is bio-insulated carbon mesh. Hidden compartment inside, sealed in polymer resin. No content manifest, no hazard label, just a partial tag code etched into the casing. Let me see it." "Can't let you pass the perimeter, but I can show you the image." He handed her a tablet displaying a still frame from the interior scan. At first glance, the compartment looked like a standard container. Rectangular, smooth edges, minimal fittings. But at the center, encased in a translucent pressure dome, was a metallic capsule the size of a shoebox, wrapped in a synthetic membrane. On its side, faint but visible, was a stamped code MX144B.79. 17. The MX series belonged to a class of advanced biocontainment shells used in military R&D, a detail she remembered from a briefing she sat through 3 years earlier, during a joint DHS-CD symposium. The capsule wasn't civilian tech. It wasn't commercial. and it sure as hell didn't belong on a diplomatic luggage manifest. "You run the code?" she asked. "Tried, came back with access dandied flags. Top-level clearance only. Anything on the contents, negative. Shielding's tight, nothing we have here can penetrate it without breach." Emma felt a cold weight settled behind her sternum. Whoever packed that capsule didn't want it scanned, and had the resources to make sure it wouldn't be. "Where's it going now?" "Being moved to Containment Lab 2, but Control requested an on-site CDC consult before we proceed. Apparently someone flagged the sample route for higher risk." Emma glanced at the time. 6:41 a.m. 40 minutes since Rico's initial alert. Every minute counted now. "Who's the CDC contact?" "Dr. Amy Harris. She's already on site. Should be here in 2. Emma nodded once, then stepped back, letting the team continue their prep. Her radio crackled. "Blake, this is stand by. CDC liaison en route to secure transport review. You're cleared to brief them directly." "Copy," she replied, trying not to let the tension bleed into her voice. She kept Rico close, her fingers brushing his collar as a grounding point. He didn't whine or shift. He simply watched the crate with the same unblinking intensity he had maintained since the moment he caught the scent. 2 minutes later, a figure in a gray Federal windbreaker and tactical field pants strode briskly toward the security perimeter, her CDC badge visible from 10 feet away. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and her face, though tired, held the sharp alertness of someone who hadn't slept but was running on adrenaline. "Officer Blake," she said as she approached. "Dr. Amy Harris," Emma confirmed. They shook hands, firm and brief. Harris pulled out a small tablet already synced to the site's live alert feed. "I was notified of an unscheduled biocontainment breach potential. What am I walking into?" "An unmanifested capsule with military coding smuggled under diplomatic credentials. Dog flagged it before any scanner caught it. The interior compartment was hidden under layered walls." Harris froze for a half-beat, then blinked. "Did you say military coding?" Emma angled the display toward her, showing the image. Harris stared at the code, and Emma saw the color drain slightly from the woman's face. "Jesus," Harris murmured. "That's an MF shell. There's only 3 of those in rotation that I know of. None of them were supposed to leave containment. Where are they usually kept? Aberdeen? Possibly Fort Detrick. Last I heard, a sample from that batch was being tested under civilian collaboration at a lab in Colorado." Emma's gaze sharpened. "What kind of testing?" Harris hesitated. "Cross-addict biogenic compounds. Synthetic immunity response catalysts. Basically, controlled exposure tests for hardening agents. Meant to simulate immunological reactions under stress. Weaponized, not officially, but let's say the line between defense and research is thin in those places." Emma exhaled slowly. "Has Rico's behavior matched anything you've seen before?" Harris blinked. "That's actually why I flagged this case. 2 months ago, we had an emergency evac protocol at a research facility just outside Denver. A containment breach triggered mass exposure drills. One of the canine units on site, also a shepherd, reacted almost identically. Wouldn't go near the equipment storage, started pacing, growling, showed signs of neurological distress. The sample involved was never officially identified. The report was closed after diplomatic pressure. Too many partners, too many hands. We were told to step back, and no surprise, it's the same dog." Emma's jaw tightened. "They've been watching him since Detroit. Since before, maybe." Harris looked up sharply. "This dog is the same one from the Detroit cargo flag?" "Yes, Rico, 5-year veteran, no false positives, until Detroit and then again now." Harris tapped rapidly on her tablet, then stopped. "Your handler notes for that incident are redacted, because he saw something they couldn't explain. And now it's back." Harris looked toward the crate. "I want that sample locked down and redirected to an off-site federal facility. I'll call it in myself. You'll need a lot of clearance to override that chain," Emma warned. "Then I'll call everyone I know," Harris said. "We're not letting this one vanish again." But before either of them could speak further, the radio clipped to Harris's vest crackled to life. A sharp voice came through. "Command to CDC liaison, stand down. Sample custody is being transferred under authority of Executive Medical Authorization, code Alpha 47. Do not intervene. Escort team en route?" Harris stared at her radio. That's not a CDC override, she said slowly. Emma stepped forward, her voice low. Then who just took control of that sample? Harris met her eyes, her voice tightening. That's Pentagon clearance. Emma felt a cold, measured anger rising beneath her composure as she stood beside Dr. Harris, both of them absorbing the weight of the override transmission that had just crackled through the radio. Pentagon clearance. Not CDC, not DHS, and certainly not local jurisdiction. Someone at a higher level had been watching the situation unfold and had now decided to remove the sample from any trackable chain of custody. In plain terms, they were about to bury it. But before the transport team could arrive, and before the sample could disappear into another black box, Emma knew there was one last thing she needed to do: interrogate the courier. She turned, moving briskly back toward the containment area where Vincent Joe remained seated, still remarkably composed despite the swirl of chaos surrounding his luggage. Rico flanked her without command, his focus razor-sharp, no longer on the trunk but squarely on the man who had brought it. Emma crouched slightly, leveling her eyes with Vincent's line of sight. "Mr. Joe," she said, her voice steady, "you're no longer being detained under suspicion of carrying undeclared hazardous materials. You're now being questioned under federal protocol regarding possible breach of international transport laws." Vincent looked at her with polite indifference. "I was not made aware that carrying unmarked containers from a federal research agency violated transport laws," he said, "especially not under diplomatic protection." Emma raised a brow. "You're confirming, then, that the container in question came from a research agency?" He paused for half a second too long. "I was told only that I was to deliver a sensitive package. I don't handle the contents. I don't open the bags. I'm a courier, Officer Blake. A professional one. Professional enough to know which screening systems don't detect biogenic insulation layers," she asked sharply. His gaze faltered, just briefly. "I know enough to follow the routing protocols provided to me," he replied smoothly, "such as avoiding specific airports, selecting manual bag drop at terminals with aging scanner arrays, and ensuring my credentials are valid under mutual recognition programs." "That's not a courier's knowledge base," Emma said. "That's insider procedure." Vincent allowed himself a small smile. "Call it professional curiosity. After all, if I am to ensure a delivery reaches its destination without delays, it helps to understand the infrastructure." She leaned in slightly. "You didn't just know the route. You knew the holes. Which makes you more than just a middleman." "That depends," Vincent said, "on whether you're interested in stopping the package or understanding where it came from." Emma held his scare. "Why don't we do both?" Before he could respond, her tablet pinged with a new alert. She pulled it from her belt and unlocked the screen. It was a summary brief from the Interagency Aviation Analytics Desk. She'd requested it an hour earlier, flagging Vincent's travel history for anomaly review. The results had returned and they were damning. According to the compiled data, Vincent Joe had traveled through 3 additional airports in the past 6 months: Dallas/Fort Worth, Miami International, and SeaTac in Seattle. At each location, internal canine units had filed reports within 24 hours of his transit. Not formal complaints, not detections, but notes. Phrases like persistent low-level growling, canine avoidance behavior, and, in one case, handler recommended isolation of a baggage cluster pending further review. But each time, the incidents had ended without escalation. Why? Because nothing scanned. No device gave a red flag. No human agent could detect what the dogs had sensed. And the man carrying the luggage was always clean, courteous, credentialed. Emma scrolled through the notes, her mind racing. The pattern was crystal clear. Wherever Vincent went, something followed. A chemical footprint, an odorless imprint. Whatever it was, dogs picked it up. Not all dogs, but the most sensitive ones. The ones trained for multi-layer biohazard detection. The ones like Rico. She looked up from the screen and locked eyes with him again. "You were at SeaTac in November, correct?" "Possibly," Vincent said. "It's hard to remember every flight." "You were there during a shipment review where a canine was removed from active duty the next day due to severe neurological symptoms." He said nothing. "And in Miami," she continued, "you passed through one day before 3 handlers reported migraines and disorientation during routine inspection. No one found anything, but 2 of the dogs involved were later reassigned." Still silence. Emma stepped closer. What is it you're transporting, Mr. Joe? What kind of compound leaves no trace, no residue, but triggers neurological and behavioral shifts in select canine units? He smiled again, this time thinner. You're asking the wrong courier, officer. I don't make the rules. I don't write the research, I just deliver. Deliver for who? She pressed. Which agency, which lab, which contractor? Would you believe me, he said softly, if I said I don't know? No. Then I suppose we're at an impasse. Emma's fingers curled around the edge of her tablet. She wanted to slam it into the wall, just to break the impassive mask this man wore. But instead she spoke slowly. You may be walking free in the next hour, but you've been flagged. Your credentials won't carry you through another checkpoint. Not anymore. Wherever you go next, someone will be watching. The transport team just arrived. They're armed. Private contractor, not federal. They showed override clearance. Emma glanced past her. A group of 4 men in charcoal gray uniforms was unloading a sleek black containment module. They moved fast, wordless, practiced, no insignia, no name tags, no visible affiliation. Harris hissed under her breath. They're going to take the whole unit off-site. We'll lose access the moment it leaves the gate. Emma turned to Vincent, who was already rising to his feet. He smoothed his coat, checked his wristwatch, and gave her a look of bemused farewell. Time's up, officer. Not for me, she said, stepping forward to block his path. You're staying for further questioning. You have no legal hold, he replied, smiling, still thin, and you've already been ordered to stand down. He was right. Legally he could walk, but if he did, everything vanished, the sample, the trail. And maybe worse, Rico, sensing the tension, shifted in front of her. Eyes trained on the man. Vincent looked down at the dog, then back at Emma. Loyal, he said. That's admirable, but dangerous. Emma didn't blink. Only for the wrong people, she reached for her radio again, fingers tightening around the push-to-talk button. Emma's thumb hovered over the radio button for 3 full seconds before she released the pressure without transmitting. There was no one on the other end who would back her up now, not with Pentagon clearance overriding her entire chain of command. Vincent was right about one thing. Her authority in the matter was rapidly dissolving, and the moment the black-suited team left the terminal with the sample, so would any hope of accountability. The containment unit had already been loaded onto a steel-framed carrier, now being wheeled toward a secured service corridor under watch from 2 private operatives who didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't carry visible IDs. Emma turned toward Dr. Harris, whose face was flushed with frustration as she typed furiously into her tablet, trying to raise someone at CDC higher up the chain. Rico sat motionless between them, tail flat, jaw tight, his eyes fixed on Vincent as if waiting for a second trigger. Then the voice came again, not over the radio this time, but in person. Officer Blake, said a calm male voice from behind her. Emma turned. It was Lieutenant Mark Rutledge, head of International Operations Liaison, a man with a clean service record and a reputation for knowing when to shut down a fire before it spread. He stood with a small folder in hand and a look that told her he already expected resistance. We need to talk, privately. She didn't want to follow, but she did. He led her through a side corridor near the emergency stairs, away from the active perimeter and the watchful eyes of Harris, Rico, and every other agent in the terminal. When they stopped, Rutledge handed her the folder. Inside was a short printed brief, stamped with the seal of the U.S. State Department and tagged with an obscure directive code. Protocol 42B, subsection Delta 3. Emma read the first line and felt her stomach churn. It referred to a clause buried deep within the International Scientific Exchange Treaty, an old Cold War provision allowing temporary diplomatic immunity for research-class biological assets in transit under trilateral joint custody review. In simple terms, it meant the crate was now protected by international agreement and couldn't be seized, scanned, or even logged without violation of multiple diplomatic accords. You're telling me this thing is legal? She asked tightly. Rutledge sighed. Temporarily. The clause is rarely used, and honestly, most people don't even know it exists. But it gives them just enough cover to get this shipment out of the country before anyone asks more questions. What about the content, the false ID trail, the redacted records? The fact that a dotted shell was smuggled in a civilian bag? That's above our heads now, he said. My job is to make sure we don't spark a diplomatic incident over something we can't prove was illegal." Emma folded her arms, the folder still in hand. "We both know this isn't about legality. It's about convenience. You're signing off on this because it's easier to make it disappear than explain it." Rutledge didn't deny it. "You've done your part, Blake. Let it go. Let the feds clean up the rest. And what if they don't? Then it won't be your name on the line," he said, already turning to leave. Emma stared at his back, then at the document in her hand, the official ink dry and resolute. But then her fingers brushed something beneath the last page, a folded piece of notepaper tucked behind the authorization sheet. She pulled it out and unfolded it slowly. It was a scanned copy of the same directive, but this version had handwriting along the bottom margin, written in blue pen. "Your dog was right once. Don't let them silence him this time." She stared at the words, her pulse thudding in her neck. Someone had slipped this in deliberately. The handwriting was hurried but firm, and the phrasing was unmistakably personal. "Not the dog. Your dog." Emma folded the page, slid it into her pocket, and walked back toward the terminal with new purpose. If someone on the inside was reaching out, it meant not everyone had signed off on this cover-up. She re-entered the active area, just in time to see the containment crate disappear behind the double doors leading to the restricted cargo elevator. Harris stood nearby, arms crossed, jaw clenched, clearly having failed to reach her contacts in time. "They're not even using CDC routing," she said through gritted teeth. "No manifest filed, no transport log. They're ghosting the whole thing." Emma nodded once. "I know." She handed Harris the original document Rutledge had given her. "They're invoking Treaty Clause Delta 3. Harris scanned it, then muttered, "Jesus Christ, that hasn't been used since they were moving undeclared nuclear samples through New Zealand airspace in '97. Emma finished. Harris looked up. "You know your treaties. I know when someone wants to make something disappear." A ping on Emma's tablet interrupted them. It was a new alert from the DHS Personnel Integrity Division, an auto-agged incident log linked to a Tier 1 contractor credential that had attempted to access the Biohazard Archive server from an off-site node. The access attempt had failed, but the location pinged outside Logan perimeter 26 minutes ago. She opened the file and found a second anomaly. A suppressed audio recording recovered from the disabled camera in Carousel Bay 6. The 8-minute blackout had one leftover artifact, a 30-second burst of static embedded with what sounded like clipped dialogue, voices masked by ambient terminal noise. She boosted the gain, ran a quick filter, and isolated the words. One voice said, "Place it under the lining, no direct contact." The other replied, "What if the dog reacts?" "They won't get that far." Emma stared at the waveform. Someone had known Rico might be there. They hadn't just hoped the package would slip through. They'd anticipated detection. The confidence in the voice chilled her. They weren't just betting on bypassing the system, she said aloud. They were counting on it. Harris stepped closer. They built the whole route around that assumption. Emma tapped the waveform again. She needed more than that. A face, a name, a reason. If someone inside had taken the risk to slip her that note, they knew something deeper. Maybe they were part of the operation once. Maybe they regretted it now. Either way, she needed to find them before the next shipment came through. She turned back toward the concourse, scanning for movement. Vincent was gone, released. No escort, no trace. But Rico hadn't moved. He was still seated near the bench, his eyes locked on the closed elevator doors that had swallowed the crate whole. Emma stepped beside him, reached down and placed her palm gently on his neck. "They think you're just a dog," she murmured. "But they don't know what you remember." Rico's ears twitched, and his head tilted slightly toward the terminal ceiling, as if sensing something no one else could hear. Emma stood beside Rico in the dimly lit hallway outside the freight elevator. The sounds of the terminal now distant and muffled behind layers of steel and bureaucracy. The sealed doors that had swallowed the containment crate loomed silently, giving away nothing of what had passed through them. Her fingers were still curled around the folded note tucked in her pocket, the handwritten warning vibrating louder in her mind than any siren. She didn't trust anyone at this point. Rutledge, the liaison officers, not even the internal DHS routing channels. But she trusted patterns, and the one she was beginning to map out pointed to something more than convenient oversight or careless classification. It pointed to intent. Harris rejoined her moments later, visibly shaken but resolute. "I just pulled external logistics logs from the freight division," she said in a hushed voice. "Here's a secondary shipment order, flagged under a subcontracted carrier, Wilmington Express. Route indicates ground transport. Destination listed as a civilian research facility in South Jersey. No federal lab designation." Emma's eyebrows pulled together. "You're sure it's the same cargo?" "Routing code matches. So does weight and dimensional specs. Same carrier crate serial. Same departure time. They're moving it out tonight, under private contract. And no federal tracking, none. They scrubbed it clean. This isn't Black Ops anymore, it's privatized disappearance." Emma looked down at Rico, who sat quietly but alert, tail rigid, ears pinned forward as if anticipating what she was about to do. "Follow it," she said. Harris's eyes widened. "Emma, you don't have jurisdiction past this terminal. You'll be on your own." "So be it," she replied. "You got a vehicle that's not registered in your name?" "I have a field van from the CDC storage lot, untagged for local use. No tracking beacon. Keys?" Harris hesitated, then handed them over. "You'll need access to the outer loading dock. I'll call in a fake retrieval order to delay the next shipment." Emma nodded, already in motion. 10 minutes later, she and Rico were moving along the airport's southern logistics corridor, in an unmarked gray van with faded CDC lettering. Rico sat in the rear compartment, uncrated, ears flicking at every passing sound. Emma drove steadily, scanning every side road and checkpoint marker. At 7:19 p.m., she spotted the Wilmington Express truck, a nondescript white box van with no logos beyond the mandatory DOT number etched in dull black font. It was parked behind Bay 4, tailgate facing the service lift, and two men in matching dark uniforms were loading the containment crate onto a hydraulic lift. No one else was present. Emma pulled the van into a nearby lane and killed the engine. She grabbed her phone and activated the passive RF scanner app, pointing it at the truck. A weak signal blinked once, then locked. A short-range thermal monitor broadcasting from the containment module. Someone inside had activated internal climate regulation. Rico whined in the back seat. Emma's pulse quickened. She glanced again at the screen. Temperature variance listed as 0. Not good. That meant whatever was in the crate was extremely sensitive to thermal change. She accessed the carrier's online inventory management portal, using a generic inspector credential she'd borrowed months ago during a joint training seminar. After a minute of navigating dummy interfaces and redirection loops, she found what she was looking for: the concealed entry under sensitive organic sample class. Opening the maintenance notes revealed a buried engineering schematic of the crate's interior. Emma's eyes narrowed as she scanned the diagrams. The pressure capsule inside the crate wasn't just passively insulated. It was wired with a temperature dispersal valve. If ambient temperature rose or fell more than 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit over transit, a chemical trigger would release the internal content through a micro-ventilation burst system. Worse, the design ensured full saturation within a sealed space, perfect for lab environments, lethal in confined transport. She muttered under her breath, "It's a fail-safe." Rico barked once, sharp and direct. She looked up. One of the handlers had stepped away from the truck, moving toward the building entrance. The other remained behind, now checking something inside the passenger cab. She opened the van door quietly, released Rico with a soft signal, and stepped out into the cold night air. They kept low, using the shadows of loading pallets for cover, approaching the rear of the box truck. Emma could hear the hum of the internal unit regulating temperature. She moved to the side panel, saw the power converter blinking steadily under the trailer bed. Then she saw something that made her blood freeze. A black cylinder tucked behind the converter assembly. She knelt, examining the device. It was a thermal override, jury-rigged, meant to disable the crate's climate control and simulate a critical error. In short, a trigger. Someone had intentionally installed a secondary system that would, at the right moment, shut off the temperature control and initiate the capsule's dispersal mechanism. Emma's breath caught. This wasn't just passive smuggling. It was planned deployment, controlled exposure. She snapped a photo, then signaled Rico to hold position while she circled toward the front of the truck. The handler inside was on his phone. She heard him speaking quietly. "Stacktivation window confirmed. Jersey Lab has final prep in place. ETA 3 hours. He ended the call, slid the phone into his jacket and stepped out. Emma retreated silently, heart pounding. She had enough to stop the shipment, but no legal authority to do so. Not yet. She returned to the van, Rico following without sound. Inside, she uploaded the photo and the schematic into a secure folder on her private server. Then drafted a quick voice memo. Unauthorized modification discovered on Wilmington Express Transport Unit. Secondary dispersal mechanism tied to temperature control override. Intentional deployment protocol suspected. Confirmed audio indicating Jersey Research Facility as recipient. Acting to intercept. She hit send, then started the van entry for a disbelief as it pulled away from the airport access road and merged onto I-95 southbound. The road ahead stretched long, cold, and quiet, lined by dark woods and the occasional flicker of highway signage. Rico's head stayed low but alert, his breath steady in the back. Emma tightened her grip on the grille. She didn't know what kind of research facility waited in New Jersey, but she knew one thing with certainty. If that sample made it inside, no one was ever going to see it again. The asphalt hummed under the tires as Emma kept her distance behind the Wilmington Express truck, the dark silhouette ahead tracing a smooth path through the early night traffic on I-95. Rico remained still in the back of the van, his focus unbroken, ears perked in subtle rhythm to every engine vibration and external cue. She had followed suspects before, dealers, smugglers, cartel couriers, but nothing ever felt like this. This wasn't about stopping a crime. This was about preventing a calculated event from slipping beneath every radar, by masquerading as legal cargo. She reached for her secondary comm and dialed a secure channel to Harris. "Amy, do you copy?" Harris's voice crackled a few seconds later. "I'm here. Where are you?" "Southbound, trailing the transport. They've got the crate set for thermal failure. It's a timed release, or remote." "You'll alert New Jersey Highway Patrol," Harris replied. "Try to get intercept teams at the perimeter of the destination facility." "Negative," Emma said. "If you go official now, they'll move the payload again. We need a controlled breach, no alerts." "Then you're going to need backup," Harris warned. "I'm already calling in a favor." Emma tapped her earpiece again and reached a different frequency, an encrypted line buried deep in the DHS tactical network. "Blake to Raven 6. I have a code red non-declared biohazard vector in motion. Target en route to suspected civilian endpoint. Need eyes, muscle, and mobile intercept now." The reply came in a clipped voice, affirmative. "Ping location, ETA 20. She hung up and refocused, watching as the truck veered off onto exit 62, turning east toward a series of warehouse lots near the coastline. She followed 2 intersections behind, slowing as she passed a chain-link fence lined with industrial storage containers. The area was quiet, too quiet for a shipment of this scale. She kept her headlights dimmed and pulled around the far end of the lot, cutting the engine and slipping out with Rico at her side. The air was sharp, salt-kissed from the Atlantic breeze, and silence hovered like fog. Rico moved ahead slightly, nose to the pavement, drawing invisible lines across the gravel. Emma followed his lead until he stopped suddenly near a loading ramp behind a concrete building with no signage. He turned his head sharply toward the side entrance, then gave a low, guttural growl, low enough to warn, sharp enough to alert. She keyed her mic. "Raven 6, target located, warehouse 12, back access, possible secondary containment. Copy, en route, hold perimeter." She waited less than 3 minutes before black SUVs arrived without headlights, flanking the lot with surgical precision. Tactical agents spilled out, weapons low but ready, their movements tight, and Rico remained still beside her until the breach team formed at the side door. Doors welded. One of them whispered, "We go loud." Emma nodded. "Go." The battering ram struck with a deep metallic thud. Once, twice, then a crash as the lock gave way and the team surged inward, floodlights cutting through the gloom. Emma followed closely behind, her breath tight, pulse steady. The interior of the warehouse was partially lit, enough to cast long shadows across pallets and shelves, but one side had been cleared completely. At its center sat a large refrigerated transport vehicle, matte gray with unmarked panels and an external condenser unit humming faintly. 2 figures near the back of the vehicle moved quickly the moment the breach team entered. one yanking at a control cable, the other reaching for what looked like a handheld transmitter. "Freeze!" the lead agent shouted. The man with the device bolted. Rico lunged ahead without command, cutting the angle across the floor with astonishing precision. He collided with the suspect mid-step, nicking him to the ground and latching onto his arm with controlled force. The man screamed, the transmitter clattering across the concrete. Emma rushed forward, securing the device before it could be damaged while other agents apprehended the second figure. She turned the transmitter over in her hands, military grade. Not just a trigger, but a remote interface system. She keyed her mic. Control device recovered, secured. Another voice called from inside the trailer. "You're going to want to see this." Emma climbed into the refrigerated unit and felt the cold bite her cheeks. The cargo hold was lined with modular containment pods, 3 of them, each sealed in carbon composite shells and displaying digital temperature readouts. The codes printed on their sides matched the one on the original crate intercepted at Logan. "You're labeled B, C, and D," the agent said. "Same format, no official registry." Emma examined the interface panel beside Pod B. It had a secondary control module wired into it. Same style as the temperature override from earlier, but this one wasn't set to trigger by ambient variation. It was scheduled. A countdown timer blinked softly. 1:32 and 47 seconds. Less than 90 minutes until automatic dispersal. "Shut it down," she ordered. The technician beside her hesitated. "We can't. Manual overrides disabled. The system requires biometric unlock." "From who?" "Whoever programmed the capsule." Emma's eyes narrowed. "Vincent Joe." She turned to the arresting officers. "Where's Vincent?" "He was transferred into federal custody at Logan this afternoon." Emma blinked. "That's impossible. He was in holding under TSA watch. Check-in confirms transfer." Escorted out by 2 plainclothes operatives. Emma's blood went cold. "He's gone?" A sudden bark snapped her attention back. Rico at the edge of the truck ramp, pawing at the side panel. Emma approached, running her hands along the surface until she found a hidden seam. With help, they pried it open and revealed a narrow compartment housing a second transmitter. This one active, lights blinking. It was synced to the other pods. A live control relay. Emma pulled her phone and launched the diagnostic app Harris had given her earlier. It pinged the frequencies and immediately flagged the transmission signature. The relay was broadcasting toward a private hangar half a mile away, one currently reserved for a last-minute charter flight scheduled to depart in 42 minutes. They weren't planning to move one sample, she said. They were staging 4. The man they arrested wasn't the top of the chain. He was the decoy. The flight was the real endpoint, and if that plane lifted off with the remaining capsules, the entire operation would vanish into thin air. Emma didn't wait for approval. She turned, pointed at Rico and spoke one word. "Find." The command to find barely left Emma's lips before Rico surged forward, his powerful body cutting through the darkness with purpose. Ears pinned, nose down, tail stiff. He rounded the corner of the warehouse and sprinted toward the outer perimeter of the adjacent airfield, where the faint whine of turbine engines echoed across the tarmac. Emma followed close behind, coordinating with Raven 6 on the fly as they intercepted ground control communications and locked the coordinates of Hangar 17, a private charter bay recently leased under a shell company with no prior flight records in the last 12 months. The pilot listed was fictitious, the cargo manifest blank, and the aircraft's destination unfiled. In under 5 minutes, the team breached the hangar doors, just as 2 technicians were beginning final checks on a refrigeration module already loaded onto the aircraft. The ensuing arrest was swift. No shots fired, no resistance offered, just silence and cold, hard stares from men who clearly believed they wouldn't be held long. But the equipment said otherwise. Along with the refrigeration module containing the last sample, agents discovered encrypted documentation hidden in a hollowed tablet, revealing a coded distribution network that tied back to multiple ports across Europe and Southeast Asia. Names of offshore labs, lists of synthetic biological compounds, funding ledgers buried in blockchain accounts tied to 3 separate venture capital firms specializing in bio-optimization technologies. Within hours, federal agencies launched simultaneous raids in 4 cities, seizing lab equipment, computers, and a dozen sealed containers that matched the build of the one Rico had first flagged at Logan. It took Homeland Security 2 full days to untangle the structure, but the picture that emerged was devastating. At the center was a private conglomerate posing as a biomechanical logistics provider, quietly moving unauthorized biological samples under the protection of diplomatic loopholes. Their operations had gone unnoticed for nearly 3 years, aided by a rotating cast of credentialed couriers like Vincent Zhou, each trained to exploit customs gaps and exploit the hesitancy of border authorities to intervene with cargo labeled as international research assets. Behind the movement was a shadow fund controlled by a tech holding group based in Luxembourg, known for investing in radical life extension, neuroenhancement, and genetic acceleration trials, fields infamous for operating at the edge of legality. The samples had not been intended for transport. They were designed for release, deliberate exposures inside research labs with tightly controlled teams, test chambers, and deniable infrastructure. Emma spent the next 72 hours giving statements to Internal Affairs, Intelligence Command, and an assortment of federal review panels. At no point did anyone challenge the facts of what had happened. The data spoke for itself. The dog had saved the airport. The handler had followed her instincts. And yet, behind the closed doors and sealed briefings, Emma recognized the same institutional reflex she had encountered in Detroit. Downplay, contain, shift the spotlight away from systemic failure. They called her actions heroic. They called Rico exceptional. But their praise came with conditions. Soft threats about protocol, warnings about going rogue, recommendations for administrative rotation to allow for cooling off. The offer came 3 days later, a formal commendation ceremony, a promotion to regional canine coordinator, relocation package included. She declined, not because it wasn't earned, but because it would pull her further from the front lines, from the field, from the next time someone looked at a barking dog and decided to trust a scanner instead. Rico, however, didn't walk away unacknowledged. At the ceremony inside a quiet DHS conference room, attended by a handful of select agents, Dr. Amy Harris presented Rico with the Federal Service Medal for Operational Excellence, one of the few ever awarded to a non-human. When she pinned it to his harness, he didn't flinch, didn't move, just stood quietly beside Emma as if absorbing none of the spectacle, only the weight of the work ahead. The final report issued by Homeland Intelligence closed with a rare clause: recommendations for new national protocol to reclassify canine alerts involving unknown substances as high pinot endorsement for human override. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. 1 month later, Emma submitted her formal resignation. Not in protest, not in anger, just with the clarity of someone who knew her path had shifted. She returned to upstate New York and accepted a position as lead trainer at a private canine academy for military and rescue dogs, where she began developing new protocols focused on behavioral nuance in scent tracking. Rico remained her partner, no longer bound to city patrols or federal circuits, but no less vigilant. Together they trained a new generation of handlers, teaching them how to listen, not just to equipment, but to the dog's silence, its posture, its breath. She hung the certificate of commendation in her office, beside a photo of Rico in front of the confiscated cargo crate at Logan. But the line she framed and placed above her desk wasn't from a speech or a medal ceremony. It was handwritten, copied from the note someone had slipped into her briefing folder before everything began. "Your dog was right once. Don't let them silence him again." When a journalist later asked why she stepped away instead of climbing higher, Emma answered without hesitation: "Because once is luck. But if no one listens next time, we'll lose more than a shipment. We'll lose the chance to stop it." Rico, lying at her feet, lifted his head slightly at the sound of her voice, eyes steady as if still waiting for that next command. She smiled and scratched behind his ear. "Rest easy, partner. We're still in the fight, just from a better angle now." And outside, beyond the training yard, the air was clean, but the scent of danger. Rico would always be the first to know. If you found this story gripping, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next mission that could change everything. What do you think would have happened if Emma hadn't trusted Rico's instincts? Would the shipment have made it out? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and which moment in the story made your pulse. We read every response. Your thoughts matter.